Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today we're going to be talking about some NBA contenders and some flaws with each one of them. And I feel like this is a good time to kind of evaluate this. We've had plenty of time to fully understand what each of these teams are about, and there's going to be some adjustments with trades happening over the next week and a half or so. But in general, we know what most of these teams are about, and I just wanted to talk about some flaws that I see with each one potentially down the road. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and admit here, I'm being pretty generous with the term contenders here. I have 8 teams listed on this list and some flaws for each one. And that's just because I wanted to have a pretty wide conversation, a general conversation about contenders as well as their flaws. So I'm not being too nitpicky about what I consider to be a true contender. We're going to begin with a team in the Eastern Conference, and it's going to be the Philadelphia 76ers. And I swear I talk about this team more than I do 90% of the teams in the NBA. I cover a good amount of Lakers and Clippers stuff. Weirdly, like the Jazz and Nuggets come up a lot, but the Sixers for sure just continue to be a very content-driven franchise and organization. But for me, their big issue and the big flaw that's kind of preventing them from being like the championship contender is fit and shooting. And you guys know this, right? Like it's the Embiid Simmons thing. How is that going to work out? What's happening with all the other shooters? They don't really seem to have that many around a group that defensively seems like it would be fantastic, specifically once we get to the postseason. Having all that size, I feel like is only going to elevate them in the postseason rather than bring them down. Like I think there are definitely teams in terms of roster construction that their style of play and their rosters are going to work now in the regular season, but when we get to the postseason, are they going to take a jump up or are they going to take a step back? And I wouldn't be surprised if the Sixers are a team that takes a step up, but certainly the fit isn't ideal. And we've talked about the Simmons Embiid thing to death, so I'm not going to cover that too much here. And the bigger issue for me is just the lack of shooting. Losing guys like JJ Redick, having players like Mike Scott have down seasons is definitely going to be an issue for this team, and whether they find it at the deadline in terms of trades or buyout players, they need more shooting on this roster, because I really believe that this is a team that could make a run this year. The more that I think about their roster, the more that I think about how they could potentially split up the Embiid Simmons thing to get both of those guys playing, at 100% maximum level once we get to the postseason. I think this is an extremely talented team and one with a great chance to win a championship, but fit and shooting are definitely going to hold them back. Moving on now to our next contender, this time in the Western Conference, and it's the LA Lakers. And the two things I have listed here are depth and health. Let's cover health first, because I've talked about this a little bit in a recent video with the Lakers in terms of how I graded their season. I gave them an A rather than A+, because I'm worried that they're running LeBron and AD into the ground. And I understand that, these guys want to play, right? And LeBron had all this rest that he hadn't had in so many years because he didn't make the playoffs last year, so he should be well rested. But I just worry about those two guys specifically. LeBron, given his age, and AD, given his injury history, I want to see them at full strength. Like if they don't make the finals this year, I want it to be because a team beat them at full strength. I don't want it to be because LeBron and AD are limping around in a series and they lose 4-2 to the Jazz. You know what I mean? Like I want them to be full strength, and I'm concerned that that's not going to happen by the time we get to the postseason. And the other issue is obviously depth. Like they're going to explore buyout options, they're going to explore trades, anything they can do to surround this team with the proper pieces, surround LeBron and AD with the proper pieces. But depth is still going to be an issue, specifically on the wings. Like they don't have bigger wings like teams like the Clippers and teams like the Sixers do. And I think that's going to be an issue. Like when you're looking at KCP, outside of LeBron, you're looking at KCP, Avery Bradley, who's like 6'2", Alex Caruso. Like the wing depth and the perimeter depth just isn't there for this roster. Obviously, you can count Kuzma in there if you want to, but I think they're going to figure that part out a little bit, but the health thing worries me a bit more. Next up now, let's cover the other LA team out there in the Western Conference. It's the Clippers. And for me, I have health as well as size listed as flaws for them. Health is pretty simple. They need Paul George and Kawhi Leonard to be healthy, to be playing at least 90% of what they can be. For them to be championship, in my opinion, favorite. Certainly contenders is pretty much a given, even if only one of those guys is fully healthy, because they're that good from a roster construction standpoint. Yeah, they've had some struggles, but I'm not too worried about it when they're missing one or two of those guys. The other issue is size, and this is something that's a little bit more difficult for them to address. They do have pieces that they could use in a trade, whether it's Mo Harkless or Jerome Robinson, but their front court situation is weirdly crowded, but also weirdly undermanned, right? Because you've got Zubac and Harrell, and they're so different that you have to split them up. Then you got some Jermichael Green sightings as well. but they don't have like a true really good sized defender. Like Zubac is a good defender, but someone like Joel Embiid potentially in the finals, or Anthony Davis in the Western Conference Finals, or even Gobert for Utah could cause that team issues. And I don't know how exactly they remedy that, because I think even though Harkless is a big piece to potentially trade, I also think that he's really helpful for this team. So I don't know that you want to just go and give him away just because he's an expiring for another big. But that could definitely be an issue for this team. Next up now, the Boston Celtics, and this is where you can kind of see that I'm kind of extending the term contender to a couple different teams here. For me, it just says, who's their go-to guy? Like, who is we're in game 6, an elimination game at home, and we need someone to go get us a bucket. We need someone to go score 4 points in 2 possessions to bring us back or to put this team away. And your first thought would probably be, it's Kemba Walker. That's probably brought him in. He's a max contract player. He's a really good scorer in the NBA. He's an all-star. Yeah, that would be nice, but part of me hesitates to think that he's that guy given his size. I know in college he's had some really good moments as a clutch player, but we're a long way removed from NCAA tournament runs at UConn, and I just question if at the NBA level he is that go-to guy down the stretch. And then you look at, was it Tatum? Is it Jaylen Brown? And that's the whole point of this video, is thinking about the potential flaws and just the question marks, right? And I think that it's easy to say go-to guy is a question mark for Boston. They have potential answers, but they don't know the answer to that question. I think that could be a really big issue once we get to the postseason. Moving on now to the Utah Jazz, and literally it just says Conley, because it's been such a strange storyline, and I've covered it in multiple videos at this point, how Utah has been so good. They've bucked this trend that they've had for the last couple of years of starting slow before the All-Star break. They've dealt with a difficult schedule to have one of the better records in the Western Conference, but they went on that run to get to that point without Conley, and now he's back, and nobody really knows what to do with him when he's on the floor. Do they have too many playmakers? Does he need to come off the bench? Is it going to impact guys like Joe Ingles negatively to the point where it's not even worth having him play? He's getting paid all this money this year and next year. What do we do? And all of that panic and that questioning is the issue here, right? It's you have to go to the postseason saying, this is who we are as a team. This is what I know we are, and this is what we're going to show every night, and that's going to be enough, and that's going to get us to the Western Conference Finals or the Finals, whatever this team ends up doing. And I just feel like that one question of how do we use Mike Conley needs to be solidified for them before the postseason. But the fact that that is their only issue, a guy that's been as consistent as Conley has throughout his NBA career, they don't exactly know what to do with him on the floor. I think that's a pretty good problem to have, and I think there's a lot of really good things to like about this Jazz team moving forward, and I'm excited to see them in the postseason. Next up now, I'm going to cover both the Nuggets and the Bucks at the same time, because I think they have similar issues primarily, and then I'll cover the Bucks a little bit more extensively as like a secondary thing here. So for me, it's about the second guy for both of these teams, because I think, pretty clearly you've got 2 All-NBA caliber players, Jokic and Giannis, at the top of both of those teams. But the second guy, not necessarily that they don't know who it is, but their performance in the postseason and whether that's going to be enough when they get into a really tough series is going to be the question mark here. So Jamal Murray for the Nuggets. Good young players, still young, still growing. I don't know if he's going to be, the best perimeter player on a Western Conference Finals team. I just don't know that. For the Bucks, I love Chris Middleton, but when it comes down to it, they're going to run into a lot of better 1-2 punches, whether it's in the East or in the finals, and that could potentially hold them back, and that certainly, I think, is a flaw for both of those teams. For Milwaukee, the other part of this is losing that Brogdon role, as I talked about in a recent video, but also just, are they going to be able to get it done in the postseason? They have such great regular season success between last year and so far this year. Are they going to be able to translate that into postseason success? And it's not like they had an awful postseason. Not like they lost in the first round last year. They lost a tough series to the team that ended up going to the finals and winning the finals in the Toronto Raptors. They won the first 2 games of that series and then just fell apart late. So I'm not saying that's a huge issue, this cloud over their head that they haven't had postseason success, but it's at least a question in the back of my mind. That's all I'm saying. And then the last team that I'm going to cover here in the Eastern Conference, it's the Miami Heat. And the note just says, not enough stars, which is a really strange thing to say about a team that's been so successful from a record standpoint to this point in the season, and in my opinion has 2 all-star players on their roster in Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. But in terms of true star power, like, again, talking about just like with the Celtics, you're counting on a go-to guy, you need to go get a bucket, is going to be Jimmy Butler, and he's been good in that role in the past, specifically last year had a couple good moments with Philly. But, apart from that, where else are they getting consistent individual offense? Everything for them is about the sum of its parts. It's about Winslow, it's about Adebayo, it's about Dragic, it's about Tyler Hero, it's about Kendrick Nunn, Jimmy Butler, which is great specifically in the regular season. But in the postseason, Is that mentality going to work well enough for them to get to like the conference finals, for example? I really like this Miami team. I love their versatility, and I think the interchangeable part of this team is a positive for the most part, but when you get down to it, is a general lack of star power going to be something that ends up holding this team back in the long run? I think it's possible, which again, having those kinds of question marks is what I wanted to cover as potential flaws for all 8 of these contenders that I have listed in the NBA. Now, you can certainly argue that some of these teams don't deserve to be on this list, and I guess you could put in a few teams like Toronto that you think should have been on the list, and that's fine, but these are the 8 teams that I wanted to cover in terms of flaws that I see in their potential contending formula. And more than anything, that's just got me excited about the playoffs. I cannot wait to see how all these teams finally match up in a postseason setting. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all so much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.